This is All About Home Construction, and here's your hosts, Terry Cannell Beck and Randy Blake.
Hold up, hold up. This is going to be a show from the archives. That's reunion, and I appreciate all of the listeners tolerating that. It's a fun thing, and I know some people were checking out the pictures on the Facebook page. Some pretty cool stuff.
Well, you know what? History.
Right? It's huge, right?
Well, even though a lot of that farming, a lot of it went into the construction industry too.
Right. I didn't really get to talk about it, but we've talked about it in the past, and some of the shingle mills they have down there, where you can take your square blocks and cut them out and make shingles, whether it's cedar or oak or whatever.
Yeah, most of them was made out of white oak.
Yeah, around in this part.
Yes.
Yeah, in this part of the country they were. But it's the same technology that you use today. Essentially, it's just a slower machine, but it's pretty cool. It's like an automatic machine.
Well, year before last out here on 421, that guy.
Yep, and I believe they'll have that out. That I should have mentioned this before, but that local High Country Crank Up is going on at the end of the month, the 26th, 27th, and 28th of this month. So you can see some of that stuff locally here at the end of the month too, and I know those people are always have put on a good show, and they'll have a good turnout, and hopefully that shingle machine or shingle mill will be out there this year, and that's a pretty cool thing too, because it's a local piece, and my understanding of it is a local family owns it, and it was copied, and in other words, a local gentleman built it years ago. It was like the grandfather, if I'm not mistaken, built that, and so that's a pretty cool piece of history that ties right here to the High Country. But that's a cool piece too. But that's the thing. There's so much. Like I said, we're talking about the farming equipment, but so much does tie into it. Whether it's the sawmill or the shingle mill or the wood splitters and stuff like that. All that is made its way into the housing industry.
Well, getting to that shingle, I got to watch on a PBS one time them showing how to make cedar shakes, and they were doing it in Canada. The only difference is this guy was putting it on, and the machine was cutting it. Remember?
Yep.
Well, this in here, the guy was taking a square block, and the blade was actually an angle blade.
Right.
So, and he pushed it. Remember the old saws, push saws, where they used to put slabs in?
Right.
For the wood stoves? Well, that's what it looked like. The
That's
only
cool.
difference was instead of having a straight saw, it had a curved blade, so it cut it at an angle every time he pushed it through. So
yep,
he actually
got the
indexed
taper.
it himself and pushed it in by hand to cut it.
That's
and
pretty
they
neat.
were required to do so many squares a day with that machine.
Huh. That's cool. Well, you think about that technology-wise. Before that, the shingles, all your wood shingles were made with a froe, and you had to split it yourself, and
Yep.
and of course that's where you led to the different thicknesses. You could, I'm sure the more experience you had, the better off you were as far as getting them even. But still, even then, you're kind of subject to what the grain does and how it splits.
Correct. And how the angle of the
Yep.
flow is.
Yep.
And how fast you can swing out wood and mount.
Right. Pop it down, exactly. Exactly. One thing I saw, and if time was no issue, if I had all the time in the world, one thing I want to do, and I think I've mentioned it before, but that's build a lathe, and like the hand powered the spring pole lathe.
Yeah.
And I saw one of those run, and that's cool. But just to see some of that stuff, and then the hort, where you carve out bowls, or you carve out knives and stuff using some draw knives and stuff like that. That's a whole. It's an art, It's cool to see.
I don't know. The old technology, some of it was quite accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And it was totally amazing how they did it.
Sure.
And but that's what makes everything change.
Yep.
Speed, production.
Exactly.
Just think if we all had to saw down trees with a crosscut, like they had to do the big cedar trees out west, or an axe.
Mm-hmm. Chop it
and
down.
Could you imagine how the sawyers was keeping
Right.
their axes sharp?
Yep. Yeah. Well, we kind of joke about it too. Even today, and I'm sure some of our listeners, if we have anyone that's in the logging industry, you buy a brand new chain for your chainsaw, and many of us just throw it on the chain and go on, on the saw and take off. But a lot of these professional guys that do this for a living, that's not even a sharp chain, a brand new chain. I know quite a few that'll take a brand new chain and fire it up on the, and sharpen it up themselves before they even turn it on.
Huh. That's because it's ground chain.
Right. But you know what I mean? It's that is an art all in itself, and getting the pitch right, getting the angles right on that, and it's cool to see. It kind of goes and the difference in doing it every day and just doing it once in a while
for cutting firewood.
Exactly. So that's just cool to see, but just the way things change in technology. One of the cool things that I saw was that they had a little blacksmith shop set up, and last week they were working on building a wheel for a wagon. And apparently this wagon had been in the family for so long, and it was a yard ornament, and finally they talked them into using it and restoring it. And they were taking the wheel off of the wagon, and the hub itself was in good shape, but the spokes and everything was pretty doty and pretty rotten. And so they were replacing that, and just to see them fit that in, and then I didn't get to see it because I didn't go back over, but they were putting the metal band on the outside. But just see them to build those spokes and fit them into the hub, and they were hand carved. I mean, they were carving them out, and
that's the reason they called them wheelwrights.
Right, that's it. I mean, but those things, they look like a factory fit, like you'd expect to go to the store and buy today. So it's pretty cool.
Well, old technology.
That's it.
And matter of fact, PBS had a special here a while back on a wheelwright in North Carolina, down around Asheville.
Yeah.
And they were showing how they fit that, how they welded it.
Yeah.
Now on the PBS special, they welded it by hand.
Okay.
With the bore axe.
Right.
And beating it.
Okay.
And lapping it together. But he said, we're doing that just
Sure.
to show y'all how we used to do it, but now we use electric welder.
Sure.
But what truly amazed me was his tools that he used to measure it, and believe it or not, it was just a string.
Isn't that cool?
But everything else,
right?
The radiuses was cut out off a jig and everything else, and
well, just to watch them bend that wood. Anybody that listens out there that's done any kind of carpentry work or any kind of woodworking, that that it's not easy to bend wood, and it takes special equipment, it takes special knowledge to get that to bend right, and not split, and not crack.
Correct. And the right wood to bend.
Right. Yeah. And inside of that, the right piece of wood to bend too, because just because it's maybe some kind of oak doesn't mean it's going to bend. You could get a piece off of this tree, a piece off that tree, and just knowing how to read that grain, I think it's kind of important too.
Correct.
So
I had a customer ask me a question the other day about his deck boards turning up, and I said, "Well, did you look the way the grain run on your deck?" And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, a lot of trees are cut so young now that you have to turn the heart down."
Yep.
And I said, the only time we ever turn the heart up is if it's got a bark edge on it.
Right.
Something that is going to pull up eventually. And what I mean by the heart is the arc of the wood.
Right.
You want it as flat as possible, and if you turn the heart up, you've got smaller pieces sticking up.
Exactly. So look at the end of the board, the cutoff end, and you can kind of read how that grain looks. Makes a difference.
And
it certainly does.
Like my daddy used to talk about when treated lumber first come out, we started using this pond dried because it all weighed so much heavy.
Yep.
But I actually feel like it's treated better than it is now.
Well, you knew it had some stuff in it, that's for sure. So, all about home construction. We'll come right back right after this. Thanks for listening to us. Obviously, by listening to this podcast, you see the value of All About Home Construction. Well, by joining our listener supporter community, you're not just tuning in, you're standing with us as we are able to support and fuel our passions of the construction industry. As a listener supporter, you'll enjoy exclusive perks, including hearing your name, or maybe even your business name, on our show. So please go to our Spotify website. The link will be in the show notes, and join. You can join for as little as $1 one-time fee, $1 a month, $5 a month, whatever you think you can afford. Every single penny helps to keep this show going as we can continue to grow and do lots more things. Thanks a lot. And again, more importantly, thank you for listening to this. That's right. All About Home Construction here on WATA. Give us a call today, 262-1567. Love to put you right on the air if you have any questions or concerns or comments, or maybe you got something going on project-wise. We like to hear about those. It's always fun to hear about projects and talk about them. So,
Correct.
Got to talk a little bit there. I got to do a little tile work last week before I went down to Denton and Mom and Dad. So that's fun. That's the first I had done of that type of tile where it kind of locks together. Can't really describe. It's like large panels that lock together, and yeah, it worked out. It covered a lot of square feet in a little bit of time. So. But I had to go around a fireplace, and that's never fun.
Oh.
The rock fireplace. The rock actually is kind of cool. A cool little story. When they built the house, Mom and Dad, they built it around the same time Interstate 77 was being built, where it goes right up through Fancy Gap, like through the from North Carolina into Virginia. It literally goes up the mountain there, and they had bought the state, I guess it was the state, kind of bought or rented out on whatever do you want to call it, a field from some people, because that's where they were putting all the rock that they blasted out.
Yeah.
And Mom and Dad knew or Mom and Grandma anyway knew the people that had the land, And so then they were done with 77 before they covered up with dirt. They went over there and got all the rock they wanted, and got some nice rock, because they could pick and choose and get pieces that they wanted. So anyway,
like you used to let everybody cut firewood on the side of the road, the state did, before they decided to start selling it.
That's it. So that's just a short little story for you. But talking a little bit about wood grain and wood a little bit, Randy. I was talking to some people this week about staining wood. Of course, doing wood floors, I've stained my fair share of board feet of wood, and it's like kind of like you were talking about with the crowns and the grains and stuff like that. Every wood is a little bit different when it comes to putting that stain on it.
Yeah, and this predicament, it's not a predicament, but just I'd like to know how you're going to match those two, pine and oak.
Right. So I was telling him off the air, I was looking at a floor, and one's a pine floor, and the living room is a oak, and the dining room's a pine floor, and they take the stain different color. It's hard to match up. I think you got to play with the stain just a little bit, and it depends on the color. I mean, the floor itself. Some pine floors will have a little bit of a red tint into it. So when you
some
put
have a yellow.
And some have a yellow. So when you go add stain to it, you have to you kind of sometimes you have to drop a couple of little drops of this and a couple little drops of that to kind of help blend it in and match it in. In other words, I've let's just say like a golden oak. That. Well, first of all, when you start talking about stains, and every brand has their own names and this and that, but Minwax seems to be the more popular one. It's the one I like to use, especially for floors. And they all there's different brands, and you can make different arguments for each, but that golden oak tends to be kind of the I don't want to say the most popular color you see around, but I would say a lot of people have it in their house, whether it's floors or furniture.
Something close to a natural, though.
Exactly. So a golden oak is going to be really the closest thing to natural, but still giving it a uniform color. In other words, they make a natural stain that helps blend things, but as far as adding dyes to it,
have you ever had to do that?
Add the dyes?
Yes.
I have.
Or
I've messed with blend. Usually, what I'll end up doing is saying I'll take like and again, there's no science to it. Sometimes you got to put it it literally is a drop of this, literally is a drop of that. But take say like out of a gallon of we'll bring it down to more of a scale that a lot of listeners will use, and then like say you take a quart of golden oak, pour it in a little bucket, and you may have to put a few ounces of like a provincial or early American that's a little bit darker, just to give it a tad more shade of color into that. But it's a lot of trial and error, a lot of samples, doing the little touches spots here and touch spots there. But
now that gets you from a floor finisher into an artist.
It really does. I mean, there's some stuff. One of my favorite floors I ever did years and years ago was a pine floor, and I added some. It was kind of like a mixed recipe of various colors. Some provincial. What do they call that? Provincial pine. I can't remember the name of it now. A colonial. They have like a colonial. Well, I don't even remember the name of it now. But anyway, I used like 4 different colors and blended them together and stained that floor. And it had this pinkish reddish look. It almost looked like a heart pine floor. Now the grain didn't, but color wise,
Wow.
it looked like it. And I always enjoyed the way that floor turned out. But then when you start talking about grain, going back to that, when you're staining anything, and again, the same technology, same ideas applies to a kitchen table or a desk, you name it. I mean, all the way to a wood floor. I mean, the staining wood's the same, but when you deal with like a pine or some of the grains, some of the woods that have different types of grains like that have more open grains. Your alders, your maple's really bad for it, and they don't take the grain even, or the stain rather even, so it gets blotchy.
About maple.
Yeah, and if you're not careful, it gets a real blotchy look to it, where you'll.
Now is that because of like the bird's eye?
That doesn't help. That's part of it. It's just, but it has something to do with the way the grain kind of soaks up the stain, and so when you put it down, and if you're not careful, and you can do this with oak too, and make it splotchy. I mean, that's why it's important to wipe it off, but it takes it more uniform. But that's why they have stuff like pre-stains and wood conditioners, if you ever see those. And so what you'll do is you put those on a pre-stain or a wood conditioner first, and then come back after that's dried and stain it, and that does help with getting it more even, less blotchy.
Now let me ask you a question now. On your floorings, back in the 60s and 70s, they always wanted us to put sand and seal on,
right,
on anything that we urethane, and you put the sand and seal on it, and you had to take steel wool
right.
it down,
Yep.
then you could urethane it,
yep,
and it left, it was a 2-coat process,
right.
But now they won't guarantee the urethanes if you put the sand and seal on,
right. It goes.
Do you know the reason for that?
I don't. I think it goes back to the companies wanting their own products, because some wood floor companies do make a sand and sealer still.
Do they?
That you put down, and it's anymore they kind of mask it as a quick drying sealer, a quick drying polyurethane, but.
Well, the sand and seal within an hour, you can go back and work.
And I've done that, and the reason I don't anymore is expense. I mean, when the VOC laws changed, it's harder to get now. Used to could get lacquer sand and sealers, which worked great, but lacquer in itself is not a very safe product. I mean, it's very flammable, and so if you're not careful, you can really get hurt on that.
Well, it actually make you pretty high too.
It will. Yeah, you definitely got to wear a mask on that one, I'm trying to remember the name. It's a denatured alcohol based sealer. It's a universal sealer is what I use, and it's some good products. It's like a de-waxed shellac. Is the way it is, so shellac's made from bugs. It has this little waxy stuff in it, and I don't know what the process is to make it de-waxed, but it's a de-waxed shellac, and you can clean it and clean it and cut it with denatured alcohol, and you can buy it. You used to could buy it at like Lowe's and places like that. Again, it's harder to get than it used to be. It's I don't know why, but I used to get it. It was Bullseye and Zinsser are actually the same companies. Bullseye
can
Parks
tell
and
you why
Zinsser.
then.
But they
No. I was thinking about something else.
but they but they're the same companies, and they both had a universal sanding sealer. But you had to be careful, because if you weren't paying attention, you'd grab the regular shellac instead of the de-waxed, and that was the difference. Like, especially if you're going over with
'Cause
polyurethane.
I really pushed to my painters to use the Zinsser Bullseye primer,
Right.
and I know it doesn't have anything to do with floors, but the reason I like it is it's a water-based
Yep.
primer. But when it dries, like even on
Right.
exterior stuff, you can't cut it off with a pressure washer.
Yeah. But yeah, they're that stuff.
It was a company that was
Yeah.
built in the commercial field.
Yeah, and they like I said, so there's like, and I don't remember, it was Zinsser Bullseye, and they had another company, another label they put out for flooring stuff, and you'd buy 5-gallon buckets full of it, but it's good stuff. But again, the reason I stopped using it, well, a couple reasons. The biggest thing is expense. It jumped up from $20-something a gallon to $60-$80 a gallon. And then, two, it's just kind of like what we've mentioned before about your shingles, or when you do putting in a window, you always do it to factory specs. Whatever that company says is what you do. And so when I'm putting finish down, I have to stick with whatever they say. So whatever final finish I'm using, whether it's a polyurethane or a water base, I try to stick with whatever they recommend. That way, if anything ever did happen, they couldn't say I didn't follow their directions, essentially. And so when you go back to the water base, again, I just kind of stick with the line. If I'm using a basic coating brand, I'm going to stick with that. If I'm using a Bona brand, I'm going to stick with their line.
Correct.
And that's sort of why I shied away from it. But the cool thing about that de-wax shellac is you could actually use it with water base and oil-based finish. Again, you just had to make sure it dried properly.
But it will bond with both.
But it would work for both. And so that was cool, because it dries to the touch, especially if you did it for woodworking projects. 15-30 minutes is dry. You were doing a little project and had it outside in the garage or something, where air was hitting it, it'd be dry in 15-30 minutes, which was kind of like that lacquer-based stuff that was used years ago. It'd dry in 30 minutes to an hour, which makes a big difference when you're waiting on paint to dry.
Never used it.
So that lacquer, it's cool stuff in terms of how it worked. It looked good, but the dangers with it was kind of why I think a lot of people stopped using it. And that was kind of the furniture industry, and they may still use it. I don't know, but I know for a long time.
I think all that they've got a
right.
good water-based urethane,
right,
because they can spray it and it doesn't run.
Mm-hmm. But I know a lot of the furniture factories back when I was growing up and before the 80s,
yes, it was lacquer.
It was lacquer, and it's a good product, but it's just a safety issue now, and I say that because it's so flammable. Doing wood floors, I know I've read a bunch of things, and especially in the 90s, it seems like there were a lot of incidences. The way I understand it, where especially in these bigger cities, so you have an apartment building, a big apartment complex, and sanding the floors and recoating them and putting some kind of lacquer-based finish on it, and a water heater or something kick in,
gas,
and
fumes.
Yeah, and so you got a spark and a flame, and boom, it turned basically a bomb. I mean, all those fumes just ignite. So
I can see that, because that's like I said, the first time
Yeah.
I ever helped
yeah,
put any lacquer down on the floor, I was about 15. They said, "You'll be all right till you go outside and get a breath of
Yep.
fresh air." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you really don't feel any of the effects of the lacquer while you're putting it
Yep.
down.
but
But
afterward,
when you get a breath of fresh air, you'll
you
have
realize
a buzz."
it. Yeah, you realize you kind of wonder why you're hungry, huh?
No, I wasn't hungry, but I got more of a headache.
Said all about home construction. We'll be right back right after this.
Calling all hungry heroes. It's time to fuel up for the day at the VFW's all-you-can-eat breakfast. That's right. Every first Saturday of the month from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., you can enjoy a heaping helping of crispy bacon, juicy sausage, perfectly cooked eggs, golden hash browns, biscuits and gravy, and so much more, only for $15. Whether you're a veteran, a family member, or just a friend of the VFW, you're welcome to join us for this delicious tradition. Come share stories, laughter, and good company while you fill your plate with all your breakfast favorites. Don't miss out on the VFW's all-you-can-eat breakfast every first Saturday month from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. See you there.
That's right. All about home construction here on WATA. Give us a call, 262-1567. Love to put you right on the air. And happy Saturday to you guys. Thanks for listening to us. And talking a little bit about wood and wood grains and stuff. And, one thing I wanted to mention too, Randy, while we were talking about that is when you're applying it, I know it looks cool on a commercial to put it on with a brush. And sometimes you need a brush to get inside of corners. But the best way to apply any kind of stain is wipe it on, wipe it off. Just like the Karate Kid. Wipe on, wipe off.
Now, do you ever put your stain on with your lamb's wool?
I have. I got more control if I just get on my knees and use a rag.
And just do it.
I'm talking about floors. I've actually put it on with a buffer. The big 20-inch buffer I've got that I use to final sand and sand in between the coats. I've actually put it's not even an abrasive pad. It's just a big white pad on it, that's soft, and put it on that way.
Down.
And put the stain on.
Now, do you still have to wipe it off?
Yep. So what you would do, you'd basically pour a little stain out and buff over it, and that spreads it out and of course soaks it up inside the thing, and you're going to hit that spot, and you're going to kind of work your way down, but then you're going to go back over with a dry pad. You're going to go back over and kind of hit it again and re-wipe it off. Took a little experience. I wouldn't recommend this. And to me, the advantage was in a big room, in a smaller, even like a bedroom size. I was doing more overlapping and going back. I don't think it really saved me time. Of course, it saved me from getting on my knees. Which is a big deal.
Well, eventually your knees wear out.
Well, that's the thing, and that, I guess that's the advantage. But when it's all said and done, it was great. But it took a while to get used to it and to get it even. But once I got it, it worked great. But to me, it was, I'm still getting the very ends, the inch or two away from the wall and the corners by my hands and stuff. That's why I'm saying in a bigger room, it works great. In an average size bedroom, it didn't save me any time. It didn't give me any better results. That's why I didn't use it. But it works.
You go. Getting back to the Threshers
Right.
reunion.
Yep.
You were trying to make it do faster with new technology.
Exactly, and it just didn't work the same. But but again, go back, and the same thing applies if you're doing a project right now. And when you're sanding something down, and go back and putting any kind of stain, especially the darker colors, just because they tend to show more. Wipe it on.
They do show mistakes.
Wipe it on, wipe it off. So, the number one thing too before you even get to that point is the prep work. Again, it's sanded down, and again, I'm thinking a lot of our listeners can relate. If they've ever sanded something, maybe use a little orbital sander to go onto it. It leaves almost little J hooks in the wood, the little scratches that the sandpaper leaves. Just make sure you get those out and sand it, because the darker you go, the more they show.
What about the new sanding blocks? It's been out for about the last 10 years.
Yeah, they work good.
Because you get them in different grits.
Different grits. Yeah.
They just don't seem to load up and fail like sandpaper does.
Exactly. But I think, and I've this is kind of my own thinking here, and that is, I wonder if part of why they don't do that is because you're not applying as much pressure to them. In other words, they're not sanding as much as
conform to your trim that you need. Well, a lot of trim today is, when it's coming out, it's done pretty.
It's
decent.
planed and sanded already. Yeah. But I will say too, and again, this is very important for listeners, and that is, if you sand a spot. So let's go back to that trim. Let's say I'm putting a piece of trim on the door frame, trimming it out, and maybe I got a little nick or a little scratch, or maybe my pencil mark or something showing, and so I go to sand that little 3-inch piece off. Just take the corner of the piece, and I'm sanding that little piece off. If I'm not careful and blend it right, when I put stain on that, it's going to show a little bit of a patch looking job where it's
Correct.
sanded.
And we have especially with beginners, they'll be going, well, yeah, I made that mistake. I got that little bit of glue there, and I'll sand it off
Right.
later. And I said, no, you don't, because once you leave it on there and then you sand
Yep.
it, now it won't match.
Exactly.
Well, what do you mean? I said, you can take, and the reason I get to the glue is because trim is, a lot of trim we get today doesn't even come from the United States.
Right.
It comes from South America. And I don't know, it's just not dried as good, or it is dried as good when it's shipped. And then it's standing in the building supply, and it rains outside, and it goes from about a 6% moisture content to about a 19%
Yeah.
moisture content. And being flooring, you always let your materials acclimate
Yep.
to the room, but then, pine's a little different than hardwoods,
Right.
because it'll shrink faster. And so we have a tendency to want to glue everything together,
Mhm.
even shoe mold. And people go, so, golly,
Right.
it takes a little more time. What the point of it is you got to have it to bond. If it doesn't
Right.
bond, then it will come apart.
Exactly.
It will get a crack in it, and not because of shrinkage.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, but again, and glue is a little bit different. We'll get into that in just a second. But if it can be just a little, like I said, a little scratch that you've sanded out. You've opened when you hit that sanded paper to it. You've opened that grain up differently than what
Correct.
the rest of it is.
That's
And
right.
so when you go to stain it, a patch is kind of the best word I can use to describe it on the radio. And it'd be typically a lighter spot. It could be a darker spot if you're using a darker stain where it soaks in. So the catch is that you still. I mean, I know you still got to sand those out. I'm thinking like a little nick or something. You got to sand that out. But take the sandpaper and lightly run it longer. And run
Feather.
down the whole piece. It's not going to hurt you.
Get on down to about a 250 grit.
Right. Yep.
Everybody wants to go with about 100, 120. And, it's awful fine grit that they
Right.
sand this material with.
Yep. Well, that's the thing. When I'm talking about a wood floor, typically 120 is about the highest grit I'll end up going on. But a floor is a little bit different because I want that to be open, so that finish can sit down in it, and because you're walking on it, you're rubbing on it every day.
Correct.
But like you said, when you're doing trim and stuff, 200, 250, even 300 works great.
Getting back to the sand and sealer one, we used to.
Yep.
We used to use 1,000 steel wool.
Steel wool. Yeah. Do not use a steel wool if you are using a water-based finish. Don't use a steel wool because what'll happen is you'll get little bitty pieces of steel wool and you may not even notice them, may not see them
until later on.
But when that water, because the steel wool will rust, as you know, with just a little bit of moisture, and when you start adding a water-based finish onto that, it'll start to rust and it'll leave a rust
And another
color.
thing about steel wool too is always come back behind it with a denatured alcohol or
Yep.
something like that
To clean it.
That will
Yeah.
wipe it off real and not
Right.
mar your finish.
Yeah. That's it. And when you're talking about stain, though, there's really just a rag in between, unless there's something weird happened, like you got spilled some dust or something on it. I mean, typically you're not going to want to touch it until you put the finish on it, because the stain anything you do to it will kind of change that color to it, and so you'll get that patched
Hard to
look.
blend.
Yeah, and so typically you whatever mistakes you have into it, once you put the stain on it, there's no fixing it. You're going to have to redo the whole thing. And that's a broad statement I just made. I mean, there's ways around that, but generally speaking, if you're not careful, it won't blend right. So, once you put the stain on it, go ahead and put the finish on it. Put one coat. And a lot of times you can touch things up easier after it has a coat on it than just a stain.
Yeah.
But we're going back to what you were saying, though, about glue. It's kind of the same thing. I think I've told you about a floor I did one time, and I came in, painter had left his drop cloth there, and it was the only thing in the house, which is kind of odd to me, this big drop cloth laying in the middle of the floor. And I go to move it, and you could tell he dumped a whole, probably 5-gallon bucket of paint
On your floor.
on the floor. And that's why he covered it up. He was trying to get out of there and go home. And So, but even then, like once it's sanded, sanded all the paint off. But once it was there, like it left this shadow of, and like the residue, if you will, of
Even
the
though
paint.
it's gone,
Even
yeah.
though it's gone,
It was
it was in that grain, and so glue's sort of the same way. You may not see it, and that's what makes sanding wood so tricky. Is you may not see it, but it's deep in that grain.
You will see it as soon as
yep.
you put the urethane
Yep,
on
so
it or the stain.
the
Because
stain.
anywhere there's a glue.
Yep.
Now, the wood will not take a stain with
Right.
glue.
Right.
But it will allow urethane to cover it
Yep.
up, and it'll shine like a new
Yep.
penny on it.
Oh yeah, for sure. So just be careful. And make sure you sand it all out if you have to. So all about home construction. We'll be right back right after this. Thanks for listening. Are you looking for a sawmill dealership that can provide you with the quality equipment you need to get the job done? Look no further than Blue Ridge Sawmills. We offer the full line of Hudson sawmills and sawmilling equipment, from portable sawmills to skidding winches. At Blue Ridge Sawmills, we understand that every project is different, which is why we offer a wide range of sawmilling services. We can help you from everything from finding the right mill for your farm, hobby, or even your business. We also offer a variety of sawmilling supplies such as blades and debarkers, so you can get everything you need in one place. If you're looking for a sawmill dealership that can provide you with the quality equipment and the service you need, then come to Blue Ridge Sawmills. We're here to help you get the job done. Call or visit our Cana, Virginia store at 276-755-3833 or our Asheboro, North Carolina location at 336-964-8304. That's right, all about home construction on WATA. Thanks for listening to us, and happy Saturday to you guys. And it's almost time to wrap things up, but hopefully that'll help some people out doing some projects, some summer projects, and big or small, right?
Correct.
And you always got to stain wood or put some finish on wood, and
one thing I do is I do use that exterior glue, but it's still a water-based glue when I put my
Right.
trim together.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because of children.
Right.
Spilling drinks.
Spilling
and things
something
like
on
that.
it. Was it that's so they make, I guess, like Type Bond, and each brand has their own version, but they got like
One
a
of them's
1
yellow,
and a
one of
2
them's
and a
brown.
3. Yeah. I agree. I always jump up to the middle one, if you will, and like you said, it kind of takes the water.
Keep a wet rag with you
Yep.
when you put it together.
Well, that's another thing too. We didn't talk about, but if you're putting finish on it, and you put water, let's say you just have a damp rag, like you said, you wipe that off, let it dry. Obviously, let it dry
Correct.
all the way. But also, if you're not careful, so when you're sanding it, just kind of think about this: when you're sanding things down, you're closing off that grain. The sandpaper's closing the top of that grain off. When you hit that water to it, it opens the grain back up,
Correct.
which is a good thing sometimes.
But
If
a
you-
damp rag.
What damp-
Not a wet rag,
Right.
but a damp rag. Now, now there's a difference. If you've already got your trim stained, and you glue it, then it'll wipe off real
Yep.
easy.
Yep.
And it won't affect it. Then the guy can come back and urethane it pretty
Right.
easy. But we've also had painters, no, go ahead and put your trim down. We'll come back behind you and we'll stain everything and we'll urethane. Well, either way you go, you still got to keep the rag with you. Regardless of coping your joints, 45 or coping, which is another story, which is a craftsman and which is a beginner, is I still use the glue, but I still keep a damp rag
Right.
to wipe everything off.
Yeah.
Even a Q-tip, you got to get it all.
Right.
If you squeeze it out, you got to get it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you take your finger and push in, you don't have enough rag there to go ahead and wipe all the way tight into the corner.
Right. It
And
doesn't quite get it off. And like you said, and obviously that, like you said, it doesn't take the stain. The darker the color you go, the more obvious that's going to be.
Correct.
If like you said, I just use the golden oak because it seems to be one of the more popular ones. Early American color is a little more brownish. It seems to be a pretty popular color, without going a walnut type color. But that's the thing. Like the darker you go, the more obvious any kind of mistake is, whether it's a glue or a scratch, that you left with the sandpaper. It all shows a lot more the darker you go.
Yeah, and don't be fooled by pre-finished floors, because that's a whole different ball game. They can stain about anything they can make popper look like walnut.
Right. Oh yeah. Well, when you think about it,
you don't have a chance to do it.
Right. They're in a controlled setting, and some of those are even baked on. The finishes. So they'll be in an airtight room, paint booth like you'd see on TV to paint your car. They're in these perfect settings where they can control everything and go in, and a lot of times that's what they've done. They call it stain, but essentially they've painted on some stuff, and
you can sand those. If it's a 3/4 product, you can sand it twice.
Right.
If it's a 3/8, you can do it once.
Generally speaking,
lightly.
Yeah, again, it goes back to who installed it and how it was installed. If they set their nails correctly, you're good to
Engineered lumber is what
Right.
I'm getting at.
The engineered, yeah.
It's a lot more stable, but it's a lot more expensive.
It goes back to what the wear layer is on it, and how rough the floor is. If you can not have to sand a whole lot of depth out to get scratches and stuff, then obviously the better off you are. When I get to an older floor and an older house, I'll usually tell them, look, there's always that chance that you're going to sand through that wear layer and you're going to start having nails showing.
Correct.
And that's kind of it's a catch-22, but it's kind of usually the best of two evils in a sense, because you want the floor to look good. Obviously, you don't want the nails to pop through, but generally speaking, they're less obvious and than a big deep scratch or a ruin.
Staples has saved a lot of floors now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And one thing I want to tell y'all, regardless, as long as it always says cabin grade on it, even though it says it has a warranty, as long as it says cabin grade, there is no warranty on it.
Yeah, well, cabin grades typically they just put a fancy little title on it. It's really a number 2 or a number 3.
Yeah,
grade wise, and it sounds cooler to buy a rustic look or a cabin look than a number 3, number 2, because nobody would buy it then.
Yeah, well, I don't know because
but you know what I'm saying. It's just a fancy little name they've put onto it. So there's nothing wrong with it. I've done many a feet, but typically it's going to be smaller pieces, and you're going to have a lot more knots and a lot more color variations into it.
Correct.
Than you would, and it depends on where you get it from. I've gotten some of those that weren't milled the best. When you put them on the butt ends,
yes,
they'd be at like
straight.
a 1 degree or 2 degrees.
Not even that.
Yeah,
just a half a degree.
Yeah, I've had some, and you put them on, and they just don't quite line up
and
right.
Then you get frustrated, and then your homeowner goes, "Well, I thought this was a better grade." Well, you're the one that bought the cabin grade.
Yeah,
I didn't buy the grade.
Yeah, lots of wood filler. Wood filler is your friend.
Well, yeah, but you can't wood fill pre-finished.
Not on pre-finished, no.
No.
That's why I'm a sand and finish kind of guy.
That's right. And you know what? I prefer it. Personally, I prefer it. The longevity is a lot better.
Like I said, to me, it kind of goes down to what do you want a floor made of 100 different pieces of wood, or do you want 100 pieces of wood to make one floor? And the difference is the way you have to do pre-finish is you're going to see those boards. Every board's going to be an individual board put together. Correct. Whereas when you sand and finish it, for the most part, it's going to look like one even floor.
Correct.
But anyway, it's all personal preference.
That's it.
All About Home Construction. Thanks for listening to us, and we'll be back next week. We'll see you then.
Have a good week.
That's it. Enjoy. See you later. Thank you for listening to All About Home Construction on the podcast. We record this live every Saturday on AM 1450 and FM 96.5 WATA in Boone, North Carolina. You can become a supporter by supporting us with a small monthly donation, and that'll help sustain future episodes. You can do that for as little as 99 cents a month, and that'll go a long way to help our show. Do that, you get your name or your company name included in our advertisements. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.